You send a calm, short message about pickup time. Within a few minutes, you get back a paragraph full of accusations, references to last weekend, and at least two things that have nothing to do with what you asked. You read it. You feel the pull to respond, to defend yourself, to address every single point that was misrepresented. And then comes that familiar tension. If you don't respond, you look uncooperative. If you do respond, you risk making it worse. That moment, that specific feeling of being caught between defending yourself and staying composed, is one of the most common traps in co-parenting communication. And what most people don't realize is that how you navigate it is quietly building a reputation, one message at a time. Most people assume that protecting your peace means going quiet, pulling back, or simply not engaging. That is the first assumption worth challenging. Silence without structure often reads as avoidance, and avoidance, over time, creates a narrative that someone else gets to write. The real issue is not how much you say, it is what your pattern of communication demonstrates over time. A co-parent who consistently responds only to the logistics, who stays on topic, who does not get pulled into side arguments, builds a quiet but powerful reputation. Not for being difficult, for being deliberate. Those are two very different things, and the distance between them is where your peace actually lives. Here is what is actually happening when you receive an emotionally loaded message. There is a psychological dynamic at play called emotional bait. It is not always intentional. Sometimes the other person is genuinely dysregulated, and that dysregulation spills into their communication. But whether it is intentional or not, the effect is the same. The message invites you to step out of the logistical lane and engage with the emotional content. The moment you respond to the emotional content, you have accepted the frame they have set. And inside that frame, the conversation is no longer about pickup time. It becomes about who did what wrong, who has been unfair, and what happened months ago that still stings. Every response you send from inside that frame is now shaped by their framing, not yours. Here is why that matters more than it might appear. Every message you send becomes part of a documented communication pattern. That pattern tells a story, not just to the other co-parent, but to anyone who may need to review it at some point. Family members form opinions based on what they hear. Mediators look for patterns. Courts, when they are involved, look for consistency and evidence of who remains steady under pressure. The question worth sitting with is this: what story does your communication pattern currently tell? There's a concept in psychology called impression management. It refers to the process by which people influence how others perceive them over time. In co-parenting communication, most of this happens without either person being fully aware of it. Every time you respond to provocation with defensiveness or emotional matching, you contribute to an impression of someone who can be pulled into conflict. Every time you respond only to what is actually relevant, calmly and briefly, you reinforce the impression of someone who is steady, focused, and difficult to destabilize. In simple terms, your reputation in a co-parenting relationship is not built in one dramatic exchange. It is built message by message, over months and sometimes years. There is another mechanism worth understanding here, something called reactive devaluation. When someone is emotionally activated, they tend to dismiss or devalue responses that do not match their emotional energy. So if you respond calmly and logically to a charged message, the other person may initially read that as cold, detached, or dismissive. That reaction can feel discouraging. It can make the calm response feel like it didn't land or wasn't enough. But here is what most people miss. To every outside observer, to anyone reviewing that exchange without an emotional stake in it, your measured response is the one that demonstrates stability. The charged message is the one that reflects dysregulation. This is where the situation becomes counterintuitive. The response that feels protective in the moment, the long defensive message that addresses every accusation point by point, is actually the one that costs you the most over time. The response that feels insufficient. The short-focused reply that answers only what was asked is the one that protects your reputation and your peace more effectively than any explanation you could write. Put simply, answer the question, not the tone. Let's look at how this plays out in real situations. A message comes in asking about an upcoming school event, but it also includes a comment suggesting you have not shown up reliably in the past. Two paths exist. The first is to address the comment, explain your attendance history, and defend your record. The second is to answer only the question. Confirm your attendance, provide whatever logistics are needed, and close the message. The first path keeps the conversation in emotional territory. The second path answers the actual need and closes the door on conflict before it opens. Over time, that second pattern speaks louder than any single defense you could offer. Here is another scenario. You receive a message framed as an accusation rather than a question. It implies that you have been uncooperative, unreliable, or difficult to work with. The instinct is to correct the record immediately, to clarify what actually happened, to make sure the other person understands your side. But consider this. The person who can be destabilized by one accusatory message is also the person who can be managed through messaging. The person who reads it, locates the actual request inside it, and responds only to that, is the one who maintains control of the communication. Deliberate is not difficult. That is the reputation you are building. Now here are the practical behavior shifts that make this approach possible to sustain. The first is to identify the logistical question inside every message before writing a single word in response. Most messages, even emotionally loaded ones, contain an actual request underneath the tone. Train yourself to find that request and respond to it alone. Everything else is noise you do not have to carry into your reply. The second is to review your response before sending it and ask one specific question. Does this reply address anything beyond what was actually asked? If it does, remove that portion. If it addresses only the request, send it. This single habit, applied consistently over weeks and months, will reduce the emotional weight of your communication in ways that compound over time. The third shift is to use a response window. Instead of responding the moment a message arrives, allow yourself a defined waiting period for anything that is not genuinely urgent. Whether that is 30 minutes, an hour, or until the end of your working day, the window gives your nervous system time to settle. It reduces the chance of sending something reactive, and it signals, gradually, that your communication operates on a structured schedule rather than an emotional one. That shift alone changes how your communication reads to anyone observing the pattern. The fourth shift is to keep your messages shorter as conversations become more tense, not longer. There is a natural pull to over-explain when you feel accused or misunderstood. More words feel like more clarity. In practice, more words in a high-conflict exchange give the other person more material to react to. Shorter responses reduce the surface area for conflict. They also reduce the opportunity for misinterpretation, because there is simply less to misread. Short responses prevent escalation. That is the principle working underneath this habit. What makes this approach particularly effective is that it works regardless of how the other co-parent communicates. You cannot control whether the other person is calm, clear, or constructive. What you can control is the pattern your own responses create. That pattern, over time, becomes a form of protection. Not because it convinces the other person to change their behavior, but because it consistently demonstrates who you are in this communication dynamic. And that demonstration is available to anyone who looks. Most co-parents who struggle with this are not struggling because they lack patience or genuine care for the outcome. They are struggling because they have not yet separated the emotional experience of receiving a difficult message from the practical act of responding to it. Those are two separate events. The message arrives and you feel what you feel. That is natural and completely valid. The response goes out and it carries its own weight, independent of how you felt when you wrote it. That is where the strategy lives. When those two events are treated as one, the emotional experience shapes the response. When they are separated, deliberately and consistently, the response reflects your values rather than your reaction. And that distinction is what most people never learn to make. In earlier videos on this channel, we explored how message layers contribute to conflict and how timing affects whether communication lands or escalates. This concept connects directly to both of those ideas. Protecting your peace is not a standalone technique you apply occasionally. It is a posture that runs through every piece of communication you send, and the more consistently you apply it, the more clearly it becomes part of how others experience communicating with you. So here is the question worth sitting with today. If someone reviewed every message you have sent over the past 3 months, what pattern would they find? Not what you intended. Not how you felt when you sent it. The actual pattern. The words you chose. The length of your responses. The topics you engaged with, and the ones you allowed to pass without engagement. That pattern is your reputation, and every message from this point forward is an opportunity to shape it, deliberately and on your own terms. If this way of thinking about co-parenting communication resonates, consider subscribing. There is more on this channel about building a steadier, more strategic approach to communication, one principle at a time. If today's video was useful, feel free to pass it along to someone who might need it. Take your time with this one.